With the coming of generative AI, there has been a lot of skepticism and anxiety across different sections of the society in the world. But let us go back to how technology has evolved. So, sir, according to you, how has technology shaped human society and has evolved over time?
Srimetha, if there is one influence on human society in the past 500 years, which is even bigger than political institutions or economic institutions, it is technology. We all know about agricultural revolution. About 10 or 12,000 years ago, it happened over a few millennia. And it also happened in varying periods. For instance, in Latin America, it probably happened much later. Agriculture itself transformed human society, because from a hunter-gatherer society to a agricultural production, it had many consequences. A, we generated surplus, and therefore population exploded. The population explosion started with the agricultural revolution. B, because there's surplus and specialization, trade became necessary. C, because trade became necessary and there was surplus, urbanization took place. So communities settled in larger and larger gatherings, and therefore the whole political institutions and social institutions, and art and crafts and many other things, and entertainment, they all became inevitably a part of the human landscape. And D, many biologists believe that the human health actually deteriorated, partly because we are eating monoculture products, not really a wholesome food that hunter-gatherers ate, and partly because once humans settled in larger numbers, the diseases, the communicable diseases spread, and therefore many of the great problems like the Great Plague or smallpox or many other diseases that decimated millions of people happened by agriculture. So you can see even that remote agricultural revolution 12,000 years ago, the first great technological revolution that mankind faced, it had profound consequences in 100 ways. Fast forward to, let's say, 2-3 centuries ago, the Industrial Revolution, the steam engine, the ginning, the spinning, and so on. That's how it started initially, as we all know. Obviously, from the transport system to manufacturing, the first green revolution, the Industrial Revolution, had a phenomenal impact. What many people don't realize, perhaps, is in Britain, during that period of, let's say, something like 1760 to 1840, roughly those 70, 80 years was the period of the first Industrial Revolution, first in Britain, later spread to parts of Europe and America, etc. But Britain was obviously the fulcrum of Industrial Revolution. You know, the growth rate, economic growth rate, many people don't appreciate this today. The economic growth rate during Industrial Revolution was about 1 to 1.5%. It was still a revolution, not only because we used machines for the first time effectively, not merely the human muscle power or the draft animals' muscle power, but the machines. But even a sustained 1.5% growth rate over decades was unthinkable until the Industrial Revolution. In agriculture, everything was based on the vagaries of monsoon or rainfall or nature, or pest and pestilence. Therefore, if you had enough production, you ate and you had some surplus. If you didn't have it, you starved. Whereas, for the first time in human history, without reference to nature, human society could produce and increase the production every year, a predictable increase. And that's how the revolution happened, and that's how prosperity came. And in today's world, if, let's say, India or some other country gets 1.5 or 2% growth rate, we would call it a spectacular failure. So the first revolution was really that. And the second Industrial Revolution was probably electricity. That started about 100, 110, 120 years, 100 years ago. With electricity came all the things that we now think of as part of modern life. Not only moving our machines, but your lighting, your fan, can you think of the world without electricity now? Only in India, until recently, many of us know, my generation, we were used to a world without electricity for much of the time. And only now we are beginning to get somewhere near where the rest of the world is. Even now, I think rural India is better than it was earlier. The other day, I think the power minister, he came out with statistics about the last decade or so. Some improvement, good improvement is taking place. We're happy about that. But the electricity transformed everything. Not only industry, not only the public institutions, but your homes and your hearts. The third revolution is the electronics and the television, the communications, and a whole lot of the computers. The fourth revolution is what is probably happening. And that is, for the first time in human history, there is fusion of the physical, the traditional engineering, the biological, your genome and so on and so forth, and the digital, the artificial intelligence, or what they call 3D manufacturing or additive manufacturing, and a whole lot of other things. So these things have been happening separately. The engineering revolution has been taking place for one or two, 3 centuries. The digital revolution has been happening for the past 100 years, particularly in the past 50 years. Similarly, the biological revolution has been happening in the past few decades. But the fusion is something new. It's quite spectacular, with consequences that can only be imagined to some extent, but actually unforeseen yet. So in that sense, the artificial intelligence is merely our capacity to now go to computing and digitization to a level which was unprecedented, unbelievable. Even 20 years ago, it was something that we never dreamt of it. Now, for instance, until about a decade or two ago, a computer could never beat a chess champion. Now I think computers habitually beat the world's chess champions. So computing power has gone to a level where the human knowledge, sum total of knowledge and experience, can now be transmitted to the machines, and by hundreds of machines which are networked again, and therefore human brain can never compete with them in terms of the pace. Maybe wisdom-wise human brain is unique. Maybe genetic instinct-wise human brain is unique. But in terms of computing power, we now pale into insignificance compared to the machines. That's where we are. So what I think we should look at is the historical transgression. This is accelerating, this process of technological change. Whether this kind of acceleration is possible to continue forever, I don't know. Obviously, there are probably going to be some limits, very much like, with the Olympic runners, can they be faster, or can they jump higher, or they jump longer? Can you continuously break records? There's a big debate going on. Obviously, there are limits beyond which you cannot go, and increasingly, it will be small, infinitesimal improvements. But in technology, I think there are quantum leaps yet happening right now. And we have to deal with that. There's no substitute to dealing with that, because no matter what you do, what you want, you cannot stop the march of technology. That stage is gone.
So since you mentioned about the fusion of in the fourth revolution, so any new technology has come with its own share of ethical dilemmas and issues. So in the recent times, with the greater use of data-led decision making in every field, MNCs like Facebook and Google have run into problems with data privacy, and regulators constantly lashing out on them. So in this context, how do you think governments should regulate technology to balance innovation and responsible use?
It's a great challenge, Srimedha, for 2 reasons. One, if we overreact, we may be undermining innovation and expansion of technology and access to technology for the bulk of the people. And 2, even if we have the desire to control and regulate, our capacity to regulate and control, I think, is very limited. Let's understand. It doesn't take a genius. I'm not really a technology person, therefore my understanding is rudimentary. But even with my rudimentary understanding, if you want to, let's say, regulate WhatsApp or Twitter or something else, who will regulate it? When most of these technologies have transcended national boundaries, unless there is even when the purpose of regulation is clearly defined and universally accepted, that's a big if. Even if the purpose of regulation is well defined and accepted universally, unless at least the bulk of the significant nations of the world They come together, they agree to regulate within their nation states but by universal yardsticks. And that's another challenge. What are the universal yardsticks you're going to apply? If somebody says vaccines are bad, don't take vaccines. Now, as a student of biology and as a person deeply committed to public health, I would say it's a very dangerous message. Somebody else message my freedom of speech. So how are you going to be united on what is or what is not to be transmitted? In my mind, I'm clear, but that I'm clear doesn't mean that you would be equally agreeing to that. So to build a consensus on these things is not going to be easy. And there are going to be more and more controversial issues. This is a simple issue. Vaccines are good, vaccines are bad. It's a scientifically verifiable issue. But there are many other issues which require a much deeper thought. So we must view it from that point of view. Therefore, regulation has to be minimal. Partly because we don't know enough, partly because we don't have the capacity. If that is the case, what are the potential problems of technology and therefore where we should look at regulation? The first obvious problem is one of employment. As Schumpeter said, it's creative destruction. Every new technology kills old technology and therefore kills old jobs dependent on old skills. This has been the age-old problem. So there used to be Luddites, a fellow called Kevin Ludd. He gathered a group of people in the height of industrial revolution in Britain, probably around the first decade or so of the 19th century. And they used to break up the machines in a futile attempt to stop the industrial revolution. While there will be a certain losers and certain winners, in the larger sense, society is winning. The reason why these technologies became enduring is human society, both the producers and the consumers, they realize that your productivity is going up. Consumers realize your ability to access goods and services has gone up, and the price has come down, the quality has gone up. When both the producers and consumers at large are gaining, there will be individual losers. Some people may lose their job. Typewriters, for instance, when I was a kid, typewriting was an important skill. And many people are typewriters. Now today, is there a typewriter employment anywhere in the country? Fax machines were pretty common. In fact, a company that innovated in a big way, Xerox, has become synonymous with photocopying. It's actually, as we know, an eponymous, a proper noun. It's a company's name. But today, I don't know if anybody is faxing anything. So it's inevitable that some jobs will be lost. The only answer is to create new jobs with new skills, or have better quality of life and look at other services that make your life richer and better. So lamenting that we'll lose jobs is no use, but you must anticipate, prepare, train, skill, and employ, because a country without employment, a society without employment, will be a disaster. And I think the greatest challenge for the next 50 years or so, as I can anticipate, is how do you create productive employment for the bulk of the people on planet Earth? Not only within nation states. India has a humongous problem right now, but there's a much larger problem because fewer and fewer people are producing more and more in the world. Whether agricultural produce or industrial production, 3% of the population can produce surplus food in the world today. And some people estimated that the total number of manufacturing workers in the world, in the organized sector, is about 180 to 200 million people. In a population of 8 billion, only 2.5% people are engaged in manufacturing. And nobody can say that we don't have enough material goods. So is the case with maybe services is a little more difficult, but the broader point is fewer and fewer people are producing more and more. And therefore, creating productive employment that meets genuine needs of the society and gives satisfaction to them as well as income is going to be a great challenge. But I don't think regulation is an answer to that. We have to adapt. The second great challenge is information, particularly in the IT-related areas. Artificial intelligence. After all, it's only garbage in, garbage out. However intelligent the computer, we think the computer is. The computer is merely taking on board all the information that we put it in the public domain. If what we put in the public domain is trash, it is bogus news, it is full of lies, then computer will simply absorb that. The computer has no indigenous wisdom. It has no inherent wisdom. That is where I think ultimately the humans versus machines, the humans will prevail. Because humans ultimately apply not only their senses and instincts, but also the collective wisdom of humanity over centuries, the historical and cultural and civilizational wisdom of humanity in coming to judgments. And a machine can never match that. Therefore, is there a case for regulation when the false news is spread? When something harmful is being spread and people are fed on a staple of lies or unverified and unscientific nonsense? Because the modern age, if there is anything, it is a scientific age that depends on logic and evidence and the best practices. If evidence and logic are not taken into account and we spread garbage through computers, it's a problem. It's going to be tough, but I think some kind of a nation-state regulation is possible. As I said before, transnationally, unless there is an agreement at least among the major nations, the more influential nations in the world, and then they follow uniform yardsticks, and they're willing to both prevent access to that garbage to the public domain, and to punish people who willfully and maliciously do it to the detriment of society. And these are huge questions, huge political, not perhaps ethical questions, but very big political questions. You see in United States today, there's a significant number of Republican Party members who believe that the election in 2020 was won unfairly. It's garbage. But if significant number of people believe that, and if the machines propagate that, that's not going to be very easy. So I think we have to look at that. I don't know how we're going to solve it politically. It's not a technological problem in my view, though there is a technology issue that can be cracked. It's more a political challenge. Then more important ethical questions. Supposing there are certain things which are seriously dangerous to humanity. Supposing you apply, let's say, the genomic technology and the cloning technology. A Chinese scientist the other day, he introduced a few genes unnecessarily in a fetus against all canons of modern ethical standards. And he is rightly jailed by the Chinese government. I think he was sentenced to 2 years prison, or maybe longer. Now, it's possible that with greater access to technology, we may do things that are extremely harmful to humanity with unforeseen consequences. Therefore, certain research and certain application of technologies available should not be allowed to be used in a cavalier manner. Already there is some understanding globally, but I think we have to deepen our understanding. In terms of computing and AI, the greatest challenge is a challenge that no other technology really posed to us. Are the computers going to take over like in Terminator films or some other apocalyptic films? No, you see all kinds of things. I don't watch those films, but Transformers, other stuff, all this high-tech stuff, apocalyptic, and the world is going to end kind of a thing. Now, people like Stephen Hawking and some of the pioneers of artificial intelligence themselves, who are very much part of the technology, they spent a lifetime, they're deeply worried about that. I don't know what is the answer. I simply don't know what is the answer. But if indeed there is that much of a danger, we have to do one of two things. Some effort globally to regulate technology within nation states and globally. But perhaps a better thing is, can we come to an agreement that when it comes to destructive nuclear weapons, for instance, or some other very critical infrastructure that can be easily undermined with a few clicks of a button, can we keep them outside this technology? Can we deliberately keep them at low-key technology and not allow the networking to take place? I don't know if it's a realistic option, but we have to look at some options. If a computer tomorrow takes over all the nuclear arsenal of Britain or America or the Soviet Union, erstwhile Soviet Union, or the present Russia, or even India or Pakistan, some other country, and the computer malfunctions, I don't know if we're going to be willing to live with that. Even earlier, if you recall, there were at least there was one instance sometime in the 1980s, when the wisdom of a a Russian official manning that signal station, that radar station, he got a wrong signal that America has launched multiple missile attack on Russia or Soviet Union. But he saw there was no other corroborating evidence, and there was no hotspot in the global politics at that time. So he used his wisdom, his judgment. He waited for 12 fateful minutes before alerting his bosses. Indeed, if there were an attack by America, that 12 fateful minutes would have been fatal for Soviet Union. But because he proved to be right and computer malfunctioned, the world probably was saved. Stanislav Petrov is the name of the man. I don't know if he's still alive. I think he passed away a couple of years ago. Stanislav Petrov. So you required a Stanislav Petrov to use his judgment to save mankind, even with relatively primitive technology in the 1980s. Today we progressed much greater. So is it possible to insulate this, if the great powers agree, at least nuclear arsenal, etc., from AI, etc., instead of a machine taking over? I don't know, but I think that should be considered. Similarly, other potential dangers of human being subjugated to machines, I don't know if it's far-fetched. I don't know enough, therefore I would not like to make a judgment call. We leave it to experts who understand better. Perhaps if networking is denied to the machine, after all, what is the power of the machine? If the knowledge of 1,000 machines is available to one machine, all the 1,000 machines become all powerful. If you deny that knowledge, hopefully we can keep them under control, at least in critical areas of human survival. So unless you look at it very carefully, the general chest thumping and bashing technology is no good, because A, you cannot control it any longer. The genie is out of the bottle. And B, it's very difficult to control technologically and politically. And C, there's not going to be an agreement on what to control. So minimal regulation in critical areas where the direct and imminent damage or harm to society or humanity as a whole. Perhaps we can look at some institutional mechanisms. It's not a satisfactory answer. I don't know if there's a satisfactory answer.
So now, since we spoke a lot about how technology has transcended national boundaries, from a research and development perspective, China has become a world leader in AI, especially in terms of patents and publications. And furthermore, China has also introduced the new generation artificial intelligence development plan in 2017, which has accelerated efforts in that direction. So do you think that any country which develops monopoly in frontier technology poses a threat to global order?
Probably not, because we're in a multipolar world. Already many nations have access to technology, and they're fiercely and very strongly competing. China, of course, done a spectacular job. What was earlier a monopoly of the richest countries in the world, primarily United States and some of the better off countries in Western Europe, China has really leapfrogged in the last 20, 25 years. I remember when I visited China in 2005, I think, even at the time, Chinese were admiring Indian higher education, not knowing how ineffective we were. And they were lamenting the lack of quality there. Already school education, they ensured a level of proficiency and competence and good outcomes. But higher education, they were unhappy. But in the last 18 years, it's not even 20 years yet, they've done a spectacular job in improving their higher education institutions, their R&D capabilities, attracting the finest talent in the world, and designing institutions and practices to encourage innovation and research and development. Countries like India haven't done that well, but we have an urge. We want to do. United States will never lose its competitive edge, because the great advantage of two things. One, the finest minds in the world, they find it a very hospitable climate, and therefore once you attract the finest minds, you'll always have an advantage. And two, the institutional mechanisms, they foster innovation and economic success based on innovation. And I think many Western European countries and countries like South Korea or Taiwan is now the leader in chip manufacturing in the world. And of course Japan, and hopefully countries like India and many other countries that are now working very hard to improve. So I think a country acquiring a global monopoly may not happen, but certainly in terms of critical inputs, like China is already enjoying a monopoly or a near monopoly of all the rare earths. And even if minerals themselves are not controlled by them, the processing is substantial done in China. I think it's a very dangerous thing for supply chains as well as global security. And I think rightly, the world is now waking up somewhat belatedly, and we are trying to have both the mineral extraction ability, accessing the minerals, and mineral processing ability across the world, and we have to accelerate the process. So that danger is real. If you control the raw material as well as the finished product because of processing, and China is now very close to near total control, that danger is very real in terms of global security. But we must all act very quickly and very efficiently to match China's capabilities and make sure that no country dominates. But otherwise, I'm not unduly worried that technology in itself will be a monopoly of any particular country. We have passed that stage.
So since you spoke about having a competitive edge, do you think given the current inadequate education system in India coupled with insufficient skill development policies, do you think India will miss the bus to technological development?
I don't know if it will miss the bus, but we're definitely close to missing the bus. Among large economies, and I say this with great sadness, and with an intention to encourage all of us to think of how to improve this, we have the worst educational outcomes in the world. We're not the second worst or third worst. Our self-image in terms of educational accomplishments and technological prowess, and our actual skill level and education levels at school and college in India, there is an enormous gulf. In every country, education is a difficult enterprise. Because as I think it was Thomas Edison who said, there's no expedient to which a man will not resort to avoid the labor of thinking. What is education but thinking? So it's very difficult. Thinking is always difficult. But most countries, at least the better off countries, the more enlightened countries, the more technologically able countries, they have focused on quality education and they're actually generating outcomes. Whereas in India, education is all about putting some more money or more classrooms and more toilets and more compound walls and more. All these are necessary, but they don't constitute education. So unless we actually build an educational edifice from grassroots upwards, from school education, primary, or maybe even pre-primary, primary, secondary school, and of course college education, and then science and technology, other branches, then integration, synthesis, multidisciplinary approach. Unless we do it very seriously, we will remain a country that manufactures degrees and PhDs without any serious addition to human knowledge. I'm saying this with a deep sense of responsibility. I believe we can do it because the demand side is very strong in this country. All of us want success for our children. Our society wants success. We are terrible at defining what is success, and we are very bad at measuring that success. But these are two easily manageable problems if we set our house in order. Because fundamentally, Indian society has hunger for knowledge. It worships knowledge, acquisition of knowledge. It worships success. And every family is willing to sacrifice enormous sums of money and time and energy to give their children an advantage, a head start. And very few societies have this kind of an advantage. A poor country like ours, rickshaw pullers are willing to spend enormous sums for their children. So we have the basic ingredients in society in place. We just have bad governance of these institutions and bad management and bad strategic understanding. So we think enrollment in schools is a success. We think some third-rate examinations based on rote learning and mass copying, getting marks and grades is success. And we must completely reshape that. And I hope we'll do that because the national education policy does look at that outcomes. But a good policy doesn't make a good outcome in a country as vast and as complex and diverse as India. It must be made into a mass movement, and all governments across the country, state and union, they must come together with a single purpose of ensuring that every child gets adequate skills and knowledge, and every child's potential is fulfilled, irrespective of the circumstances of birth or poverty levels.
I think with that, we come to an end of this discussion. Thank you so much.